So one question you might ask yourself is, why are we here in class? And there's many different ways to answer that question. One of the things that is probably most obvious is just how much the government influences our lives. If you look at the pictures of the various objects and people that I have included on this page, you see that many of these people affect every little aspect of your life, from the president to the Speaker of the House to the Supreme Court. We have an image of voting. We have the image of the FBI. The FBI is kind of evidence that even when you're not interested in the government is still interested in you. And maybe a couple pictures here show us a different view of the United States, right? You know, patriotism or beauty or some of the many things that you might love rather than be concerned with. And so, if you're thinking about why are we here, on some level we're here because we are in America, we are seeking to be educated, and maybe understanding a little bit of the context of the place we live is very important to us. Well, I am almost 56 now, so it is almost time for me to update my thoughts on the things that I have learned in the years of my life. For some odd reason, I've decided to update these during prime years, right? So I was 53, that doesn't divide by anything. So maybe I should wait till I'm 57. But part of this exercise that I went through, it helped me clarify just where you are. You know, I'm not quite at the halfway point, but I hope I'm not yet at the two-thirds point. Um, and so maybe you should look at and do this for yourself this summer. But one of the things that I do realize is that we are all very much contained by time. And so, you know, they say that the days are long, but the years are short. And so when you're thinking about why you're doing this semester, I hope it's to achieve a longer term goal. I hope it's to perhaps get done with school a little bit faster, or to understand something about government so that you can make a difference. Or perhaps, you know, you just want to fulfill a requirement so that in the fall semester you can really focus on that class that you truly love, that you came to college to study. I hope that you didn't just come to college to uh, to enjoy yourself for 4 years. I don't think that that's a common trait, but you know, some people do that. But you know, if you have in your life 4,160 weeks, that would be a pretty typical life. You know, if you get to be your age, you probably have a good chance of making it to 80. And well, in 4,160 weeks, you're dedicating, what, 8 weeks of that, 9 weeks of that to our time together. And so I hope very much that in this time you gained something that you feel like it was worth your while. And if there's anything that I can do going forward that will make you feel more that way, even if you just want to send me a message and ask what do I think about some topic, go right ahead. I encourage you to do that. Some of why you're taking this class is something entirely outside of your control. It's something that really emphasizes just how important government is. Government is so important that they can make you learn about themselves. Ultimately, we get in a lot of trouble if we had tests about who Carl Snook is, or if we had tests about who each of you are. You would be able to complain about privacy violations. But the government says it's important. And Georgia has passed a law that says that everyone should take an American government-like course to ensure that they have a knowledge of important government processes like the U.S. Constitution. And so we'll talk a little bit about Georgia and we'll talk a little bit about the United States during this semester. But in some ways, it would be a shame if all you did was tick a box. Some ways it would be a shame if all you did was impress a member of the Georgia General Assembly who probably hasn't thought about this requirement since he voted for it, or if it's, it was a couple generations of politicians ago, so hasn't thought about this since maybe they were in a committee meeting several years ago. You might want to learn a little bit about American government as a tool for critical thinking. We're going to include an element of rational choice theory, which is some very solid, very solid theoretical construct, a little bit of a historical understanding. And so if either of those are your fields, this should be a class that's useful to you. You might want to understand how the American political system works, the structure, elections, political values. Sometimes people will look at this. When I constructed this this slide, I envisioned a time when there'd be a president who lost the electoral college and won the popular vote, or rather the other way around, because if you don't win the electoral college, you're not the president at all. And fortunately, that wasn't the case in our last election, where Trump actually managed this time to get a majority of the popular vote, so that at least we have a president who was elected by plurality of the people. It might be good for political socialization. Political socialization is the process by which citizens acquire their political beliefs and values. So you've been learning this all of your life from when you were a small child. My first political experience was probably a Memorial Day parade when I would guess, about 3 years old, and my mom pressed a flag into my hand and told me to wave it as all of these men, I thought of them as soldiers. They were veterans who were marching in the parade, went by. And so, I did this, and I think back all of these years later, and I say, is that why I'm a political scientist now? Well, now you've reached a point where you're an adult, and this would be a great opportunity for you to interrogate some of the things that you've learned so far in your life, and I hope you come to appreciate at least where your political values to this point have come. But if there's some little idea, some little different way of thinking about things that helps you feel like you're more of a well-rounded citizen, or at least resident of the United States, then I hope so. I hope you get that from this class. So there's many reasons why you might take this course, in addition to it's a requirement, I'm stuck taking it. What else would somebody do in a Georgia summer when it gets so hot? Some students wanted to spend a lot of time during spring semester talking about American politics today. This certainly was a interesting election that we just had in 2024. Some things that happened are very rare in American politics. Donald Trump lost an election, and then he came back after 4 years out of office. It had only happened one other time in American political history. And by Republican standards, it was a fairly resounding victory for Donald Trump. He won the popular vote. He's only the second Republican in the 21st century to do that. The Republicans win their share of elections because, well, mostly because California is very, very strongly Democratic. And so California, if you look at the whole other rest of the country, Republicans tend to have a slight advantage in the total vote. And then the many millions of California votes come in, and it sweeps the Democrats into the lead in the popular vote. But our electoral system is set up so that no matter how much you win a state by, you just get that state's electoral votes. So you might win a state by less than 1% of the vote, like Donald Trump won Wisconsin, and you get all of Wisconsin's electoral votes. And you might win a state by 20%, and you'll only get all of that state's electoral votes. and 20% of a state like California is many millions of votes. So, so that one of the interesting things that happened in the election was that Donald Trump was able to narrow his deficits in a lot of the states that doesn't do well in, and he won a couple states that he normally doesn't. So he won. He won the popular vote, and he won in the electoral college, and now he's back as president. But that's not the only thing going on. We also saw that every one of the seats in the U.S. House of Representatives, 435, were up for elections, and the Republicans actually lost one net seat out of that. So they already had this impossibly seemingly narrow majority in the U.S. House of Representatives, and now it has shrunk by even one more. Interestingly enough, there have been several Democratic members of the House of Representatives who've died during this term, and it's always helped keep the Republican majority just a little bit larger than the elected majority. But when everybody is back, the Republican advantage should only be 220 to 215. And that's certainly very narrow. Anytime that 3 Republicans don't vote with the majority, then the Republicans would lose. In the U.S. in the U.S. Senate, it worked the other way. The Republicans actually gained 4 seats in the U.S. Senate, and they did exceptionally well, winning states like Ohio and Montana, where they knocked off senators who had served for 18 years. This is interesting because, unlike the House of Representatives, where the Republicans are mostly very, let's say, Trump aligned, not to use a conservative versus liberal term, whereas in the Senate, this seems to be very much less so. And it's probably because, on average, members of the Senate serve longer and are from back before Donald Trump was a factor in American politics. So we'll talk about the House Senate this semester, and we'll also talk a little bit about the various rules of these bodies that are sometimes more important even than just how many exactly seats that you have. We'll talk about the Supreme Court. The Republicans or Republican presidents have appointed 6 of the 9 justices on the Supreme Court, but they don't always agree with President Trump. So we'll see a little bit of back and forth between them, and we'll try to learn a little bit about how the Supreme Court's structured and how they remain independent of the political leaders. And then we'll talk a lot about the bureaucracy. One of the most interesting things about our bureaucracy is that it's in a state of flux of reimagining. Just a few years ago, the main idea was that courts tended to pay a lot of deference to the decisions made by the bureaucrats. Now we see that the executive branch is actually going after and trying to reform the bureaucracy, cut the bureaucracy, maybe even attack the bureaucracy. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Now, this isn't primarily a Georgia politics class. I feel an obligation to talk about Georgia politics a little bit because, well, for one, the General Assembly would like me to. But for 2, and probably more important, this is closer to where we live. Even when the U.S. government is making these laws, they're often implemented on the state level. So we have an election coming up in 2026 for governor, which will be interesting because our current governor, Brian Kemp, is term limited, which means he can't run for re-election. In Georgia, you can only serve 2 consecutive terms. And so Georgia history is interesting in that all the way since the end of Reconstruction, actually since 1870, Georgia Reconstruction collapsed before it did in much of the South. So from the 1870s until the 21st century, until the 2002 election, every governor we ever had was a Democrat. So when they passed their law about making sure we all understood uh, the uh, the system of government we had, these were Democrats who passed that law. Well, since 2002, we've had 3 straight Republican governors who have served 2 4-year terms. First we had Sonny Perdue, and then we had Nathan Deal, and now we've had Brian Kemp. And so it'll be interesting to see as Georgia becomes more and more of a swing state, whether the Democrats are able to compete strongly. We tend to have fairly close elections when it's an open seat, when nobody's running. So we should have a very interesting election this next time. The Georgia General Assembly, ever since it was redistricted in the 1990s, has become increasingly Republican and then completely Republican, but now with demographic changes, especially in places like Cobb County, we see more and more that the Democrats are becoming competitive. Maybe competitive's not the word. The chance of the Democrats actually taking over the General Assembly is virtually not existent. The chance of the Democrats having the ability to get what they need passed because they've narrowed the Republican majority after the 2026 election, that is certainly there. The Georgia Supreme Court is appointed by the governor, and so we see that over the course of this time, all of our Supreme Court justices, save one, is a Republican. I did say that the governor appoints the Supreme Court, but after a number of years, they have to run for re-election. And when they run for re-election, anybody can run. And so one Democratic-leaning person ran and won an election a couple years ago. This would be Ellington if you wanted to look him up. And so we also have a Senate election in 2026 that's capturing a lot of people's attention. Right now, Georgia has 2 Democratic senators. They were both elected in the 2020 election, and Raphael Warnock has had to win again since then. He won a special election because of a retirement by a Republican in the middle of the term. And Jon Ossoff actually upset a sitting United States Senator. But in 2026, Ossoff is up for re-election, and as I make this video, it's not sure exactly who he's going to be facing. So lots going on in Georgia politics right now. We'll review the 2024 election just a little bit, if you want to recap that. I tend to like to see what we can know going forward. They always joke that political scientists are really good at predicting the past. And so, if I point out 4 or 5 things that political science could tell you about the 24 election before it happened, it might be fair for you to say, yeah, but that already happened. What can you tell me about the future? Well, we'll be together here now for the next several weeks, and if anybody wants to ask me any questions, feel free to do so. This could be about the class, this could be about an upcoming test and how to study, or this could even be about some area of politics that you probably would walk down to the front of the class and just ask me in passing if we were in a face-to-face class. So good luck, everybody, and I'll be communicating with you.